You're in here for a monstrous crime. That, I presume you would agree, it was a monstrous crime. You've always challenged the notion that you yourself are a monster. Professionals have said you're a psychopath. How do you categorize yourself?
To respond to the question about whether or not I may be a psychopath or a sociopath or whichever phrase you want to use, I want to point out in the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, psychiatrists and psychologists and other mental health professionals now favor the idea of spectrum. And I'll be the first to agree with you. And yes, I did commit a monstrous crime, but does one mistake define my entire life? And does that one mistake mean that I'm at the extreme end of the spectrum? I don't think it does.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so he says here that, people shouldn't be judged, I guess, by their mistakes. I think that's dependent on the mistake. I think there's levels of mistake. But what he's trying to put forward is this logic of and I guess cultural theory that everyone has the right to be reassessed, and the therapeutic valuation that everybody can be changed with the right help, the right therapy. Everybody can be changed, and everybody has rights for that change to happen. And so ultimately, the big ideal here is everyone is redeemable. Everyone is redeemable. And that is something that you see in religions, and we see that in psychotherapy, or some people's idea of religion and some people's idea of psychotherapy, that everybody is redeemable. And people will throw that out idea, everybody deserves a second chance, is the idea of everybody's redeemable. Well, I think that's one way to look at it. Then there's another way to look at it, which is actually there are some cases where that is absolutely not true. Now, there are certain parties who won't go down that avenue with you, and they'll go, no. Like everybody gets this moment where they get rejudged, and like it's game off. Okay, there's a moment where you get that chance again. Both in religion and in psychology, we get those moments. Well, he knows that, and he's going to play that one, and that's what he's playing right now. So when you hear him say that, think about, I personally go, no, it just really depends on the mistake. It really does. I mean, we'd have to judge it on a case-by-case basis. That's a very expensive thing to do, by the way, is judging everything on a case-by-case basis. It's much cheaper to go, well, everybody or nobody. Like, you always get a second chance, or nobody gets a second chance. You can make quick decisions on that. So he knows that that's the way the majority of people might tend to think, is they want a simple solution to, he said it right at the start. He said, look, you want simple solutions to this. Here's his simple solution. Everybody is redeemable. And think, when I say that, which side do you go? Do you go, I mean, that's how it should be? Or do you go, no, not at all? Or do you go, yeah, it's some delineation in between? Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, so I just put a note. He's using the good book to defend himself, the DSM. I love the fact, and Chase, you're going to talk about the DSM in a minute. I know I almost wanted to go right behind you because I was going to even add a little more nuance. So I'll let you add the nuance when we're done. But that might be true, that it's on a continuum. It's somewhere on a spectrum. Okay, let's assume that is. Let's for a second assume it is. We all know that Hare's psychopathy checklist says you got to get a certain score to get there. Okay, good. The other thing he says right up front is he does with that persuasion face again. Yes, I did commit a monstrous crime. So out the window is I'm not a villain, because we looked up the dictionary definition. He is a villain. Out the window is I'm not a monster, because who commits monstrous crimes? Monsters. So now he's a monster and a villain. The other thing he does that I find really interesting, he chooses a diagnostic tool, which if you're going to use, then you have to use the tool. And that's what dictates that you are. But he doesn't. He says, I don't think it does. So he's using the tool, but he's going off script to decide whether it fits him or not. Chase, what do you got?
Before we talk about the DSM, as Greg predicted, Let me take you on a quick guided tour of his manipulation strategy here. There's immediate agreement with Pierce. He hedges and distances himself from any direct answer. He borrows authority from the DSM. He softens the crime twice using the word mistake, uses an FBI negotiation technique to get you to make an agreement that is illogical, but places him slightly away from the worst outcome. This is designed to be a psychological foot in the door technique. It's a method for getting gradual unconscious agreement. And then there's half blinking. He's sizing up a target. He's checking to make sure that it's working on the target. So let's chat about this little guy. This is the DSM for everybody that always comments about the tabs. Let me give you a quick close-up, what they all look like there. So in this book, there's no diagnosis of psychopathy. It doesn't exist in here. And the people who write it are pretty smart. But in my opinion, they tend to medicalize normal everyday life in a lot of these conditions. They turn them into medical things. And I think some other criticism of the DSM, it forces a lot of clinicians to make guesses about things like the word callousness. How do I define callousness? Well, that's up to you. You do it however you want. As a second note, if you want a little more criticism and a fact, 69% of the doctors and people, experts who built this book have direct ties to the pharmaceutical industry. Proven. And with all that said, it's a great guide. And as Mark says all the time, all models are wrong and some are useful. And this is just useful, but human beings don't fit into Excel spreadsheets all the time. So people are different. Scott, what do you got?
All right. He was ready for this answer. Yeah, he's read the DSM. And he's decided the best bet for him to sound normal is talking about all this stuff because he's preparing for that parole board. He's preparing to try to get himself out with a great story. We're hearing more severity soften as he talks about his mistake. And this thing just sounds rehearsed. And if you listen to it one more time, this is one of his go-tos. I'm sure he's got a little book where he's written all these things out and goes over them. I'm not positive, but that's what I think he'd be doing because he seems like that kind of guy, to make sure he's got everything straight with his story. So, okay.
One of those tape replays.
You're in here for a monstrous crime. That, I presume you would agree, it was a monstrous crime. You've always challenged the notion that you yourself are a monster. Professionals have said you're a psychopath. How do you categorize yourself?
To respond to the question about whether or not I may be a psychopath or a sociopath or whichever phrase you want to use, I want to point out in the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, psychiatrists and psychologists and other mental health professionals now favor the idea of spectrum. And I'll be the first to agree with you. And yes, I did commit a monstrous crime, but does one mistake define my entire life? And does that one mistake mean that I'm at the extreme end of the spectrum? I don't think it does.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.